let's jump into this deep dive. And today we are talking all about hedonism.
Hedonism.
Now, I know when you hear that word, you might think of, someone on a yacht sipping champagne, just pure indulgence.
Right.
But it's actually way more complex than that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So essentially, hedonism is this idea that pleasure and happiness, those are like the ultimate goals.
Yeah, the ultimate goals in life.
What's really interesting is that there are different types of hedonism.
There are.
It's not just about, indulging in every whim.
Right.
So we'll be kind of unpacking all that and exploring how these ideas, some from ancient times, are still surprisingly relevant today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, it's fascinating to me how those ancient Greek philosophers,
Right.
they were already grappling with these big questions about pleasure and happiness and what it means to live a good life.
Yeah.
And their insights are still so relevant even today, especially when you think about how our modern world really pushes us toward instant gratification.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock a bit. Tell me about these different schools of thought on hedonism from ancient Greece.
Yeah, so in ancient Greece, we have the Cyrenaics,
Okay.
and they were all about living in the moment,
Okay.
embracing immediate sensory pleasures.
Okay.
So, savoring a delicious meal, enjoying great company, basically anything that brought joy right then and there.
So kind of like the live for today mentality?
You could say that, yeah.
Okay.
But then you have the Epicureans,
Okay.
who had a different take.
Okay.
They believed that true pleasure came from tranquility and moderation.
So not quite the life of the party types.
Not exactly.
Okay.
Epicurus, he was their main philosopher, and he believed that avoiding pain and anxiety was key to happiness.
Interesting.
He wasn't against pleasure itself, but he cautioned against overindulgence,
Okay.
arguing that it could actually lead to suffering.
Right.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, which, as you can imagine, isn't always easy.
That makes me think about all the times I've planned like a perfect vacation. And the stress of making it all happen actually took away from the enjoyment.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how the pursuit of pleasure,
Yeah.
if taken to an extreme, can backfire.
Yeah.
Epicurus was really onto something with this idea of moderation.
Okay, so we've got these two ancient schools of thought.
Right.
But how does this all play out in the different types of hedonism we see today?
Well, there's sensory hedonism,
Okay.
which is probably what first comes to mind when you think about hedonism. It's all about those immediate physical pleasures. That amazing cup of coffee in the morning, a breathtaking view, a good laugh with friends.
Those experiences that just make you feel good in the moment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But then there's ethical hedonism,
Okay.
which takes a more philosophical approach.
Okay.
So this suggests that actions are morally right if they maximize happiness
Okay.
and minimize suffering, not just for yourself, but for everyone.
Okay.
So it has some similarities with utilitarianism.
So it's not just about my own pleasure, but thinking about the greater good too.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about considering the impact of your actions on the happiness of others.
Gotcha.
And then there's psychological hedonism.
That's psychological hedonism. Okay.
This one suggests that we're all wired
Yeah.
to seek pleasure and avoid pain,
Right.
even if we're not always aware of it.
So it's like a fundamental drive
Yeah,
that shapes our choices.
that's the idea.
Okay.
It suggests that even when we think we're making rational decisions,
Right.
there's often an underlying motivation
Yeah.
to maximize pleasure and minimize pain.
This is all pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder if we're all inherently seeking pleasure. Does that make us selfish?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to some of the criticisms that have been raised about hedonism.
Okay.
But before we get into that, I think it's important to discuss what's known as the paradox of hedonism.
Okay. I'm all ears. This sounds intriguing.
All right, so the paradox of hedonism suggests that directly chasing happiness can sometimes have the opposite effect.
Interesting.
It's almost as if the more you fixate on being happy, the further it slips away.
I can definitely see that. It's like when you try too hard to have fun at a party,
Yes.
it ends up feeling forced and awkward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really interesting. It's like there's this delicate balance between embracing pleasure
Yeah.
and allowing happiness to kind of arise naturally.
So how do we navigate that balance?
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where it feels like we're constantly bombarded with messages that equate happiness with buying things or achieving a certain status.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like we're being sold this version of hedonism
Right.
that's all about consuming more and more.
Yeah.
But there's a deeper, more meaningful way to think about hedonism,
Okay.
one that goes beyond those fleeting pleasures.
Okay.
And that's what we'll explore further in this deep dive.
This is making me rethink everything I thought I knew about hedonism.
Yeah, it's so much more nuanced than I realized. It really is. It really is. And you're right, that idea of like consuming our way to happiness.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Right.
It's like everywhere you look. I think that's a prime example of where hedonism kind of gets a bad rap. It's often portrayed as this really shallow pursuit of pleasure.
Right.
But that's really just scratching the surface.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. You mentioned some criticisms of hedonism.
Right.
What are some of the main concerns people have?
Well, one of the main critiques is that it kind of oversimplifies human experience.
Okay.
Life is more than just a series of pleasurable moments, right?
Right.
We all have responsibilities,
Mm-hmm.
challenges, even moments of sadness or frustration.
Right.
So reducing life to just the pursuit of pleasure,
Yeah.
it kind of ignores all those other facets.
Right, it's like expecting to be on a permanent vacation.
Yeah,
Is that realistic? And probably wouldn't be that fulfilling after a while.
exactly.
Yeah.
Think about the feeling of accomplishment you get after completing a challenging project,
Mm-hmm.
or the deep connection you feel in a meaningful relationship.
Right.
These experiences aren't always, easy or pleasurable in the moment, but they contribute to a much richer and more meaningful life.
So it's not just about feeling good all the time,
Right.
but also about those experiences that challenge us and help us grow.
Exactly. Another criticism is that hedonism can lead to selfishness.
Okay.
If you're only focused on your own pleasure,
Yeah.
it's easy to neglect the needs of others.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
I imagine taken to an extreme, it could justify all sorts of harmful behavior.
Yeah, that's the concern that some critics have. They
Yeah.
worry that a purely hedonistic approach could ignore ethical considerations,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to how our actions might impact others.
Okay, so it sounds like finding that balance between personal happiness and ethical considerations, that's key.
Absolutely. And another criticism is that hedonism places too much emphasis on pleasure as the ultimate good,
Okay.
while kind of overlooking other important values.
Okay.
Think about things like honesty, integrity, or compassion.
Right.
These values might not always lead to immediate pleasure,
Right.
but they're essential for a just and harmonious society.
It's like those times when you do the right thing, even though it's hard or might even cause you some discomfort.
Uh-huh.
It's the right path, even if it's not the most pleasurable one in that moment.
That's a great example. It shows that there are values that we hold dear,
Right.
even if they don't always directly result in pleasure.
It's interesting, though, because those values often lead to a different kind of satisfaction,
Yeah.
a feeling of doing what's right or contributing to something bigger than yourself.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us back to the idea of balanced hedonism.
Okay.
It's not about rejecting pleasure altogether,
Right.
but being mindful of the bigger picture.
So how do we find that balance? Where do we even start?
I think it starts with understanding what truly brings lasting happiness,
Okay.
as opposed to fleeting pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
It's about cultivating those meaningful relationships we talked about,
Right.
finding activities that genuinely align with our values,
Yeah.
and, finding joy in the simple things.
Right.
Remember Epicurus? He was a big advocate for simple pleasures.
Right. And that seems to tie in with that idea of intrinsic versus instrumental value.
Exactly. Hedonism sees pleasure as intrinsically valuable good in itself.
Okay.
But other things like money or possessions, they're only instrumentally valuable.
Okay.
They're only good if they lead to pleasure.
Right.
Epicurus believed that true happiness came from those intrinsic things, friendships, inner peace, appreciation for the simple things.
That's really making me rethink my priorities.
I think that's the beauty of exploring these philosophical ideas.
Yeah.
They challenge us to question our assumptions and look at things from a different perspective.
This has been so insightful, but I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed.
I understand.
There's a lot to unpack.
It's a complex topic, but I think the key takeaway here is that hedonism is much more nuanced
Yeah.
than just seeking constant pleasure.
Right.
It's about understanding what truly brings happiness, both for ourselves and others,
Mm-hmm.
and finding a way to live in accordance with those values.
And realizing that happiness isn't a destination, but a journey, right?
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices that contribute to our overall well-being,
Yeah.
both in the short term and the long term. It's about, enjoying life's pleasures,
Right.
while also recognizing that there's more to life
Yeah.
than just feeling good all the time.
Okay. I'm starting to get it, but
Yeah.
how do we put all of this into practice in our daily lives? So how do we put all this into practice in our daily lives? It feels like a big shift from that instant gratification mindset that's so prevalent these days.
Yeah, it is a shift, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming, you know? I
Okay.
think it starts with small conscious choices.
Okay.
Like next time you're about to, make a purchase, ask yourself, will this truly add to my happiness, or am I just kind of caught up in the moment?
So instead of like automatically reaching for that extra gadget or trendy item,
Right.
just take a pause and consider, does this align with what truly matters to me?
Exactly. And that goes for experiences too.
Okay.
Maybe instead of that expensive vacation, you prioritize quality time with loved ones or dedicate time to a hobby that brings you joy.
Hmm.
Remember, Epicurus believed that true happiness came from those simple pleasures and meaningful connections.
That makes me think about how I often put off calling my family because
Yeah.
I'm too busy.
Yeah.
But those conversations always leave me feeling so much happier and more connected than, say, scrolling through social media for an hour.
That's a perfect example, and it highlights another key aspect of balanced hedonism,
Okay.
mindfulness.
Okay.
Instead of just going through the motions, really pay attention to what brings you joy in the moment.
Yeah.
Savor that cup of coffee, appreciate the beauty of nature, engage in conversations that truly matter.
It's like training yourself to notice and appreciate those small pleasures that we often take for granted.
Exactly, and I think this is where the idea of, designing a life based on hedonism becomes really interesting.
Okay.
What would that look like for you?
Yeah.
What values would you prioritize?
Right.
What kinds of activities or experiences would fill your days?
That's a great question to ponder. If I were to create my own hedonism blueprint,
Mm.
I think I'd focus on cultivating deeper connections, making time for things that spark my curiosity, and contributing to something bigger than myself, and definitely less time on social media.
It sounds like you're already on the right track.
Yeah.
And remember, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
What constitutes a balanced approach will vary depending on your own values and what brings you meaning.
It's about finding what truly resonates with you,
Exactly.
not just following someone else's idea of happiness.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's what makes this journey so exciting. It's an invitation to become more conscious and intentional about how we live our lives, to choose those experiences and relationships that truly matter, and to savor the simple pleasures that bring us joy.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what hedonism really means, and it's so much deeper than I ever imagined.
It's not about being selfish or constantly seeking pleasure, but about making choices that lead to genuine and lasting happiness both for ourselves and those around us.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive into hedonism.
It's been my pleasure. Keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, the pursuit of happiness is a lifelong journey.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into hedonism. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep diving deep.